Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. So this is Alit Part 4, and I would like to get my presentation up here on the screen and share it with you. Here. Okay. Yeah, so what I'd like to try to do to round off this discussion of Alit, the music that I'm going to talk about is a piece that he composed a few years after Genetic in 2016. And I want to try to see if I can view Alit and his music from, not from a Balinese perspective, but from an international perspective. Because number one, I think that's what Alit would really like. He'd like to be known as a composer without necessarily being known as a Balinese composer. Although, of course, I don't want to, diminish the very, very strong, unbreakable connections to tradition that his music has. But my feeling is that there's something going on in the world today in which new kinds of musical construction and musical and rhythmic interaction are present in lots of different kinds of music all over the world. And I think Alit is really part of this. And what I want to do today is try to get really specific about what that is. So to start that, let me read you this quote. Well, it's here. I'll just read it out. This is a really old quote. It's from 1992, which is 30 years ago. And it's a quote by Ustad Imrat Khan, a very, very renowned sitar player who was interviewed by Professor of Music Theory, John Ron. And he says something which nobody hears. You're all going to almost roll your eyes. You know, we're living in a very beautiful world today. These cultures developed in the West and the East in such a beautiful way in a closed environment with the knowledge accumulated like matured wine. So it is very nice that this mature wine that has been cultivated and matured for such a long time in one environment suddenly is available. And it is beautiful. It's available because of television and radio and planes, which were not there before, and recording especially. So we're living in a world where all of this fantastic contribution of thousands of years in the work of masters is available to us. Now, from our 2020 perspective, this comes off as a bit quaint, actually, because he was talking before the internet. And 1992 is so long ago, and in terms of cultural interaction, 2020 maps onto 1992, like 1992 maps onto 1950, or maybe 1850 or 1750. He sounds very generous. He very instinctively, as an Asian traditional musician raised in his culture, but he asserts his own agency that this music belongs to him. The world of music belongs to him. And I think that that's, nobody listening now, I'm sure, needs to be persuaded of this, but we often, especially before the internet, used to think of cultural interaction as a kind of a one-way street, that there was appropriation going on, mostly from the West, borrowing musics of the rest of the world, and not so much in the other direction. But Khan reminds us that these things have always gone both ways. And Alit is an incredible example of this. I mean, in the past 20 years, he has lived almost every year for a long chunk of time abroad. And he lived in Canada, working me and my students for a number of years. And then for about more than 10 years, maybe 15 years, he went every year to MIT in Boston. And there he had an apartment and he would teach the gamelan there. And he was constantly going out to hear jazz and new music. And I mean, he had that incredible privilege to do that. But even now in Bali, you know, last time I was in Bali, I was meeting with a group of young composers and they were asking me all sorts of questions about music that they're listening to online. So, I mean, the world is much bigger than just the traditional music that is their heritage, and everybody is trying to respond to it. And I know Jodi's out there, and I just want to say that this response is something that you started to chronicle back in the 1980s and 90s when you were working on new music and gamelan. But it seems to me that in those days, the interaction was pretty narrow in between what we would call I'm going to use the word classical with quotes, classical Western contemporary music and this sort of avant-garde thing. Whereas now it's much more of a broad search for grooves and different kinds of rhythms that come from many different cultures because those all become accessible to us. And to make this point, I want to start out not with Balinese music, but with 5 examples. Really, I'll go really quick of different kinds of music from, you know, major urban centers around the world that I think have a lot in common with what Alit's doing. Let me start with this big band called Rumpiles from Salvador, Bahia, in which you hear, I'll give you a minute or two of this music. You can hear that this is obviously based on African rhythms, but instead of it being the usual kind of African 4-beat or 3-beat groove, or however you count, the usual African 12/8 timelines, things like that. This composer, he's a fantastic jazz composer, has transformed it into a 7-beat structure. So check it out. An important part of this interaction, to me, is in the world of what I would call post-jazz, or you could call it contemporary jazz. There's a lot of music that's happening now in which jazz players and composers are reflecting, pretty serious study of different rhythmic traditions around the world. This woman, Mary Halverson, is a guitarist. Some of you might know her music. She got a MacArthur Genius Award this year. Here's a little bit taste of what she's doing. of each of these musics, and we could look at the particular way they combine polyrhythms and different meters to create challenging new kinds of rhythmic relationships that I think can be called grooves, because the musicians are all embodied in the music. They're all, some of the music uses notation, like the big band is people are reading off of charts, but basically all of this music is kind of an oral tradition, and it's meant to be played without notation. It's meant to be felt with the ensemble, and that's, no matter how much Alit uses notation, his music is to be felt. So let me go on and talk about this piece. So we've already met Alit, and there's where you can find Pengosekan, and there's Alit. This is a picture of Alit's village in 1971. And Alit's father is, Alit's father is the drummer on the right there. And this is the central square and the village temple as it looked at that time. It's a lot more developed now. But where the photographer is standing, the photographer's back is directly onto the house where Alit and his brothers and father and the rest of his family live, their family compound, which is today still the home of the Sudamani collective, although Alit has now, since he married and had a family, has now moved kind of around the corner to a nearby place. So let's start. We've gone over these things already, so I'm going to go into the background of this piece, which is called Ngejuk Memedi, and I'll get to all of that. And then I'm going to focus in, as I said, a very specific rhythmic phenomenon inside of it that I hope you will hear, as having something in common with the other things I just played for you. So here's the basic Balinese Pelag scale as one could notate it. And I know everybody knows this, but for those of you who are not familiar with, why can't I play the media? For those of you who are not familiar with the Balinese paired tuning system so much, this will make it very clear to you. There, this works. Okay. So the piece that we're going to talk about is called Ngejuk Memedi, and there is one painter's image of a Memedi. It's a kind of a demon, invisible to most human eyes, but it's a phantom. It's dangerous. It's scary. Alit says that his music sometimes feels to him like chasing a phantom, or just looking for something which is going to shake the foundations of his musical reality. So that's why he named this piece. And he told me that he planned several pieces with this title, although I haven't seen the next one yet. So after Alit composed, Alit is obsessed with, trying to take the gamelan and develop it in a direction which was inconceivable to his ancestors and yet is consistent with the tradition. And part of that, as everybody's been talking about, is mode and tuning. And partly as his response to having lived in North America for so long, where Alit heard a lot of Western music and got interested in the Western 12-tone scale and the idea of harmonic motion. And I'd like to talk to Alit more about this, but to understand how he processes or feels harmonic motion. Wayne talked about the end of Gurgal as being a sense of harmony changing. It was really modes changing in that case. But I think Alit wanted something more. And so he had quite an interesting idea one time to create a new scale and to retune the Salukat gamelan, thereby making it impossible for genetic to be heard that way again, into actually two parallel, simultaneous modal systems. And so it's an 11-tone system composed of two 7-tone scales. 3 of the tones are shared between them and 4 are independent. So you have each of the 2 scales has 4 notes, that's 8, plus the 3 that they share makes 12. And he chose these notes with reference to the 12-tone scale, but he had his own concept of how it was going to be heard. And half of the instruments in Salukat were tuned to one of the 2 scales and the other half to the other. And in the music, he uses them sometimes independently and sometimes together. These are how the scales look in a very rough Western notation. As you'll hear immediately, they don't sound at all tempered. And of course, that's a problem with using Western notation. And I want to come back to the idea of Western notation because, we're all making transcriptions in this, and, what does that really mean? We can discuss that later. But anyway, here's the first of the two scales. So half of the instruments are tuned to this. Okay, so you can see from the circled notes the ones they share. And when you play them together, they sound like this. Okay, so I chose these colors just to make it really clear, because later on when I show you the music and transcription, I'll keep these colors consistent so you can see which scale is being used at which time. So that's a really, to me, very beautiful and utterly distinctive tonal world with the combination of the paired tuning and the unusual intervals within the scales and the intervals that are created when the scales are played together. And so Alit has that potential to use all of those things, to use them individually and together, and create a much more elaborate system of tonal color than he could get in his other pieces. And much more rigorous, I should say, too, because in Genetic, I think he had tuned the gamelan in a certain way, but he did a lot which we didn't get a chance to talk about, with changing the vibration rates between them, but he couldn't really separate the instruments out from each other, or separate the different qualities of those different vibrations out from one another. So now this is now Alit's taken to notating his gamelan pieces in full score, and we were talking about this each time. Now for Genetic, he may have notated the parts separately, but for this piece, he makes a complete score with all of the rhythmic relationships and the alignment, and he puts the colors there to tell you which instruments are playing which part. So the purple ones are playing, the first scale, and the green ones are playing the second scale, and things like that. And you can see it's just like a conventional kapatehan or cipher notation, and you can see the rhythmic relationships there. And my Western transcriptions, which I'll show you a little bit of, were made with reference to this. So let me talk about the form of this piece. And there's a really great video of the last 4 minutes of it, which we're going to watch in a couple of minutes. Maybe some of you have already seen it. It's got quite a few hits on YouTube. Anyway, here's the entire piece. It's divided into two parts. It uses this 11-tone scale. And the two parts are exactly the same length. And guess what? They're 11 minutes in total. What divides the piece in half is the entrance of the gongs and the drums right in the middle. So the first half is kind of a much more delicate contrapuntal melodic thing. And then in the second half, it becomes a much more of a cyclical thing. I have to stop and say one thing I meant to say earlier, which is that in addition to Alit's innovations in scale and tuning, he's part of a movement in Balinese music, which, he's one of the more important practitioners of it, but it's not just him, it's other important composers like Wayan Sudirana and Gede Udana and many others that have largely, I would say, rejected the idea of repetition. Balinese music is known in all the textbooks, and for every beginning student of gamelan, it's all about repeating cycles. But this piece, except for one or two small things, and many of other pieces do not have repetition in them. And not only that, the transitions from one section to another do not all often do not line up neatly, so that some lines continue contrapuntally through transition points. So there's a movement away from that kind of cyclical structure, and I think it's really interesting to consider why. And so when you put that together with the pitch world, you have quite a big difference. So this piece has no repetition in it. There are lots of similarities of motives. There are things that come back, but they always come back in a different alignment with other things. And that's one reason why, as Aska was saying, his music is so hard to learn. But the musicians do it. Sometimes they take cell phone photos of Alit's notations, and sometimes they record what they're learning, just like any of us would. So anyway, right at the midpoint there, there's a kind of a full group thing. I'm calling it a 2D fanfare. It's kind of dumb to do that, but anyway, all the instruments come in, and then you have this very central section. I'm calling them the core phrases. There are two of them, and then you have the fact is that these are structured in similarly to the other 11ness features of the music. The meter here is kind of an 11, which is dot 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 dot, and each of these phrases uses that meter 11 times. So I mean, this guy is imposing strict constraints on himself and doing it in a very consistent way. That is, needless to say, well, to my mind, it's consistent with the kind of rigor that you find not only in lots of traditional musics in the world, but also with 20th and 21st century, or many Western compositions. And it's, when you forego the structures that the tradition gives you, you have to come up with something that's equally as rigorous. And then from going on from these core phrases to the end, he's using material from the first part of the piece, but all reworked. So that's what we've got. So what I'm going to do is focus on this second core phrase. And first I'm going to show you the video. And the video starts with core phrase V and goes to the end. And then we're going to come back and look quite deeply into core phrase B. So, those of you who aren't Balinese music, nuts, you're going to watch this guy. He's playing an instrument called the complete, and he's going to be repeating that pattern. So if you want to be oriented in the music, you can follow his mallet going up and down and see this pattern, and then you can hear everything else in relationship to it. So this video is about 4 minutes long. Let's have a listen, and I hope you enjoy the second half of this piece. Okay, so let's go back to the very first thing we heard in that video. You'll have a chance to hear. Well, let me play it for you again. It's just this, it's an 11 beat meter, and you're going to hear that meter 11 times, and then I'll do the analysis of it. So here, just listen to this section that I'm going to analyze. Ooh. Yeah, sorry, one more time. All right, so let's look at this, and then we'll listen to it again. There are the 11 measures, and there is the 11 beat pattern that's sort of controlling it all. And then we're not going to talk about the notes and the tuning and the harmonies anymore. We're basically going to talk about the rhythmic layers here. And so there are two other main rhythmic layers. One of them is played by the rayong, that's the long row of gongs. Oh, no, sorry. In this part of the analysis, it's something else. I want to show you how, excuse me, a lid alternates the two scales. So actually, we are going to talk about the scale for a minute here. A lid alternates the two scales and then uses them in combination in a very, very interesting way. First, he uses scale number 1. He waits for four 8th note pulses, and then he uses scale number 1 for 9 pulses. And then he uses scale number 2 for 13 pulses. So of course that divides up the 11 in an asymmetrical way. So 9 plus 13 is 22, that's 2 measures of 11. And then he does that again, right? But the 9 plus 4 is the same thing, it's a 13. And then he does it, then he breaks it down. So he speeds up the rhythm of change. He does a 3 plus 6, which makes another 9. And then he does another 13. And then he has a little transition here, changes it again, 4 plus 4, and then 4 measures of both scales together. Okay, let me lead you through that with the animation. That same thing in a Western score. No, just the last 3 measures when they're all playing together. So you can see it from that perspective. Here we go. Just those last 3 measures. One more time on that. Top system, you have the telephones, and then here in this middle stage, you have the rayong with its big chord, and those X's are when you come down off the boss and you play on the rim. It makes a kind of a chak sound. And down here you have the drums, and down here you have the bass. And the bass, metallophones called jagogan and chalung, and they are playing pretty much in coordination with this 11 beat pulse. Okay, so let's go into that a little more. Sorry, I forget what my animation is. That's what I just told you. Okay, So let's use these colors to identify each of these things. Now, here we have, again, and I'm just going to talk now about measures 8, 9, and 10 of that 11-beat phrase. Okay, so here's 3 cycles of the 11-beat meter played by the complete. If you're not from, I mean, probably most you know the word tactus. I'm sorry, I don't mean to patronize anybody, but just, tactus is the beat, basically the beat that's comfortable, the beat that everybody feels. And then we have the, oopsie, sorry. Pardon me. Okay. Okay, then we have the gong and drum layer. And the gong and drum layer is playing a repeating pattern that is 8 beats long. Let me do that again. Okay, it goes, yeah. Except that, of course, because the meter is 11, these things fold over from one cycle to the next, right? Okay, so we have in these 3 measures 4 iterations of this very simple 8-beat pattern, which is basically a half note and then chap with a rest. 4 beats of the gong sounding, and then on the 5th beat of the 8, the percussive rim sound followed by a rest. And that happens 4 times, which makes 8 times 4 is 32. And since it's 3 measures of 11, that makes 33. So there's a 1-beat rest at the beginning. In the kind of irregular, all very closely related. Okay, so the rhythm is da 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 dam dam da 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 dam 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 da 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 dam dam da 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 dam da 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 dam dam da 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 dam da 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 dam da 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 dam dam dam. And that's very simple when you hear it on its own, but when you hear it in relationship to the other things, it becomes something very complex. Listen to those now. See if you can hear those layers. So now I'd like to look at that from a different perspective, and here's where I really get into it. So let me explain to you, there's a system of music analysis now developed by a music theorist at Harvard named Christopher Hastie, which uses the concept of projection. And projection is the idea that when you hear something, your mind automatically goes into prediction mode. Okay, I just heard this thing. When I hear it next, I'm going to expect it to repeat. And if it doesn't repeat, then my prediction is wrong and I have to adjust my perceptions. So let me show you what I mean. I've marked in all 11 of the the faster beats that go with the meter. And first we will see that when this initial pattern begins, it's off the beat with relationship to the 11-beat meter. But when it comes back again, and the next 11-beat meter, it's on the beat. So its alignment is flipped. Okay, so that's a first perception that you can have. And now look at that upper phrase, da 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 dam dam. Okay, so you hear that, and as soon as you hear da 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 again in the next one, you think, oh, okay, I'm going to hear that again. It's going to come again, da 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 dam dam. But it doesn't come again because it goes da 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 dam 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 this time. And so that means you're predicting that it's going to repeat, but your prediction is dashed by what actually happens in the music. And you're wondering, well, what's going on here at that moment? And at the same time that that's happening, you also have this longer note in the meter, this tactus beat that has 3 parts to it instead of 2. So when you get to that very last 11th beat of the measure, you are sort of hanging in this very strange limbo, trying to make your projections and also adjust to the flipping of the meter, because that extra note is obviously what flips the meter. So, oops, sorry, one more time there. Okay, so then it starts a third time, and then you wonder, oh, which one is it going to be? Is it going to be the 4-beat one or the 6-beat one? Da-da-da-dum-dum. And it turns out that you're right this time, that there's going to be another 4-beat one. It's a little different, but when it starts again, where it's shaded out there, your prediction is confirmed. So you have this a rising expectation and then dashing of your expectation and then reasserting of your expectation. And then in the middle of this, you have this 8-beat pattern in the rayong, which does come every time the same, except the problem is it's so out of sync with everything else that it's arriving on a totally different part of the meter. So you have this real perceptual challenge here of trying to manage two very incompatible meters, 8 and 11, the gongs and drums being an 8-beat phrase, an 8-beat unit and an 11-beat unit, and this changing layer in which there's no clear meter, it comes in and out of being regular. And so you're constantly making these adjustments. And as I say, I think for me, oh yeah, you can see there that whenever these, fours come back, they're in different relationship. You got a lot of fours in the upper line, and they're continuing to change their relationship to everything else as well. So you've got a lot of pleasurable work to do to try to feel all these things. And the musicians themselves have that challenge as they're learning it, is to feel all of those changing sensations and to bring it across. Let me play it one more time now. So that's the main thing. The main point I wanted to make really is the whole point of all this centers on this red dot here. It's this moment when you're hanging in midair rhythmically, and you have a lot to deal with. You're juggling these different rhythmic balls, and then you have to figure out how to adjust to them. And at the same time, as I've been saying, it's a groove, because everybody's hanging in there together and doing this with their ears and their bodies, and they're feeling it. So let's see, repetition of groups that are unaligned with the meter, which eventually resolve to the downbeat, which is like, as Oscar suggested earlier, T-high or Mora patterning from Indian classical music. Polyrhythmic, stratified, interwoven layers. This is a kind of an African concept, which happens in jazz, lots of music. But I mean, I think definitely I can feel that kind of tension working for Alit here, and I know he's heard lots of African music and lots of Indian music. Then we have this idea of non-isochronous meters. That non-isochronous meters basically means odd meters, in this case 11, and you find those all over the world. I mean, you all probably know this and everything like that, but this is not the first time I've given this talk, and when I did give it before, it was to people who didn't necessarily immediately make those associations, so forgive me. And then this idea of directed polyphony, the idea that his music is moving in a certain direction towards this resolution, which I consider to be a fairly Western idea. But all of this is tied together with the idea of groove, that it's something you all have to feel together and be able to lock into. Now, last year, a week here at University of British Columbia, we commissioned a piece from Alit, because he has been composing for Western ensembles in the past 4 or 5 years, and he's got his Sibelius, and he's got an electronic keyboard, and he's been learning Western notation. And we asked him what he wanted to write for. Well, first of all, he was commissioned in 2015 by Ensemble Moderne in Frankfurt, and he wrote an orchestra piece for them, which was for him a huge experience. Of course, that's one of the hottest new music ensembles. Some other for some of Lou Harrison's instruments that I think Jody helped organize, and they also had piano and flute. And last year he wrote this piece, Simulacama, for us, and it's for strings and piano. I'll just give you a taste of it. Anyway, I think that's the end of my presentation. I just wanted to put a little bit in that context, show how he's continuing to grow, and we all look forward to his next, next things. I hope all of that came across clearly. So.
Thanks, Michael. That was great.
I can't see you all. Where are you? Let's see.
Let's have you I'm going to stop your participant sharing here. And
okay.
There
Let's
we go.
see. There we go. Okay, did that all come through?
It did, yeah. There was a little bit of a delay, at least on my end, with the clips. Okay. Sometimes there was a little bit of an overlap with you speaking and the clips. I think it has something with your internet, but maybe when I go to edit this, I can you can send me your slideshow and I can edit it in.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was only looking at my slideshow and I didn't see any of all these messages coming through to me. I guess I need to.
No problem.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions for Michael? There was a lot in there, so it was great. Okay, Putu has a question. Why don't you jump in, Putu?
Go ahead, Putu. How are you doing? I got to get my video on with just a minute. I can't start my video because you've stopped it, Matt. Start me.
Do we see him yet? I won't speak until I see you.
Okay. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, Pablo. That was awesome. This is truly one of, if not my favorite Dewa Alit piece, and I'm so glad that we have a chance to talk about it a little bit. And I'm glad that my video was off, because as we were listening to it, I was having a sort of one-person mosh pit session in my room.
Me too.
It's the antithesis of a pit. But my question here stems from the sort of programmatic nature of the title. And to me, the title Ngejuk Memedi, right, it's not Madi is the creature, but to Memedi is the practice of that sort of particular creature, the practice of transforming yourself into that sort of dark creature. And I'm thinking about these things as like Ngejuk Memedi is like to in search for those that are practicing it, right? So to capture those that are practicing it. In that's just to my mind, and Dewa Alit may have a different description of this, but it got me thinking about your sort of international perspective and all the music that you listed, and the commonality, at least to me, apart from just sort of the mathy rhythms and grooves of it, is that they all have this sort of looming and lingering darkness to it. And, we can associate whatever affects we want to musics that we interpret ourselves. But to me, the sense of avant-gardism, the sense of gent and math metal have something to do with this kind of darkness. And I think that plays really well with the association with Ngejuk Memedi, specifically, where the musicians in Salukat aren't just performing a new piece, they're actively performing darkness, or they're practicing darkness in this way that is akin to polyrhythmic indeterminacy. So my question is,
wait, why is it dark? What's dark about it?
What's dark about it? Again, if this was titled something else, I think I would have interpreted it slightly differently, but because of my own personal associations with heavy metal and avant-gardism, and talking to Dewa Alit a little bit about it, there seems to be a tinge of talking about darkness, especially if we're talking about the practices of Memedi, right? The practices of creatures and witchcraft and things like that. I don't necessarily like those words, but to use those. Anyway, you mentioned briefly the idea of polyrhythmic indeterminacy, and I've been thinking about that for a few years now, but I'm still a little unclear about how you're using it, because to me, those are sort of conflating things, right? When we're talking about the polyrhythms that are in Ngejuk Memedi, they seem to be very precise, at least the way you've. Whereas indeterminacy to me means sort of the antithesis of precision. To just sort of thinking about it. So
you're right. There's there's a lot of music out there which is indeterminate. In other words, I've heard music that uses lots of polyrhythms piled on top of one another without really caring about where they land. And I guess that would be true polyrhythmic indeterminacy if we're going to be strict about it. But I still think there's an element of that in this piece because of those moments that I was trying to get to where you don't know where you are. That's all. That's all.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
All right. Does anybody else have any questions they'd like to jump in and ask?
Well.
Hello.
Who's there?
This is Alex Zia. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can't see you.
That's because my camera doesn't work. I'm sorry. I'll just have to be blank.
Okay, say your name again.
Alex Dia.
Oh, Alex, you're there. Oh, I don't see you on my screen, but great. Nice to speak to you.
Yeah, I just want to say hello. We haven't seen each other in so many years, and I'm very pleased with all of the work that you've been doing with bringing ethnomusicology back into using notes.
Oh, that's very kind of you to say.
No, it's really important because the other direction is very not interesting to me.
Okay.
But anyway, I just wanted directly to your example today. I'm thinking about Pantokro, the famous Javanese Gamelan master, that back in the 50s and the 60s, he was doing things that are unusual according to the framework of the traditional 8 beats, 16 beats, and things like that. And he did some things with 10 beats and maybe even 11 beats. And for him, the most difficult thing was that the musicians could not play because they were not readers. You know, they were the traditional guys. So when you asked them to go out of 8 into 10, even though it's even duple, they had a lot of trouble. And so I'm wondering for you and your musician, not you, but the musicians here, is it because they're younger and they've gone through EC and they can read notes, or because there's some other way in which they can deal with the offbeats and the non-synchronicity of what's expected?
Yeah.
That's my question. Hello?
Oh,
Looks like we
just lost Michael. Yeah, Michael just, oh, here he is. Let me unmute. There we go.
Can you hear that?
Yeah. Hello?
Michael's a little broken up here.
Musicians can do now. You can't hear me?
You're breaking up a little bit, Michael.
Should I try to come back in, leave and come back?
Yeah, why don't you try to do that?
How about now?
Better.
Better? Yes?
Yep, go ahead.
Alex, do you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Thank you.
I just think music is kind of like long distance running. You know, we keep breaking records. The things that musicians do now routinely, and this goes for many traditions, were impossible to do 40 or 50 years ago. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with the player piano studies of Conlon Nancarrow. Those were considered totally impossible to play, but now people play them. They're doing rhythmic calculations in South Indian music that were unheard of 30 or 40 years ago. Jazz players are doing polyrhythms. I just think that, the access, and, especially since YouTube, you can go out there and you can find a million videos of people doing insanely complicated polyrhythms that nobody would have ever even attempted 30 or 40 years ago, and Balinese musicians are no exception. So we're just kind of pushing our musical capacities farther than they ever have. Wayne, where are you, Wayne? Are you there? Wayne's involved with this amazing group called the Light Bulb Ensemble, run by a composer named Brian Baumbush, and they put out a CD a couple of years ago of pieces that he and Brian had composed, which involved extremely complicated rhythmic cycles interacting in ways that, were just, new. They were new, and I think people can do it. I think there's probably a limit beyond which we can't go, but we're still exploring that limit. Wayne says he has a question.
Yep.
Is that good, Alex? Does that answer your question?
Yes and no. I guess because my question is based on not so much just if the younger people have learned a way of dealing with this, question that we're talking about. Just like if we go back to Western music and we look at we look at any of the so-called difficult music in let's say in the 1970s, of course, all the kids can play them now because they've got used to it and they've studied it and made some effort.
Yeah.
So I'm more heading in the direction of, it's not that the older people could not do things, but that what they were doing was based on a different place where they were coming off. Something more with the way that their body works. So they always know automatically where's the gong and the kumpul and, other things that are a little bit not on the beat. So here, these are quite a lot further. So what is in the body of the young people when they have to ask, when they have to add, just one beat, and then everything else is shifted off. So I'm talking about the off beats.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I agree, but we all have these incredible opportunities now to, I couldn't have done African music until I studied it. Now I can feel it better than I used to, and I think that it's a matter of exposure, and it's a matter of self-awareness as a musician. Like I want to, instead of not just I want to do what I inherited through the oral tradition, as passive knowledge, but I want to develop my active knowledge of different kinds of music and be able to do different kinds of things. And I think that's a really contemporary stance for a musician.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Wayne has a question next.
Yeah, Michael, thank you so much. This was wonderful. And this helped me to bring together a few things in my mind that I'm going to try to articulate as a question. It might be kind of impressions in search of a question, but I'll try anyhow. So it's kind of, in a way, continuing on what Alex just brought up. It has to do with physicality. And so two kinds of physicality, one for the composer and the other for the players.
Okay.
So in my impression of traditional gamelan music, if we can call it that for a moment, for both the composer and the players, the core of the music lived in an interior sonic world around a single melody. In other words, I think, and I don't know, I didn't grow up from early childhood playing gamelan, so this is just my sense of it, but I think that when the essence of the music existed in some musician, it really could be, they could be going along and there would be some internal melody, and it might have many dimensions and embellishments and elaborations to it, etc., as we all know. Yeah. But that was the essence of it. And then, like I said, it was the same, I think, for the composer and the performers. So, but now with Alit, I feel, I wonder, I wish Alit could, answer this directly, but I wonder to what degree that has shifted for him in the initial conception of music to a visual interior impression when he starts, in order to imagine all these different polyrhythms coexisting in space and these different scales. So that's one side. And then the other side is that he transfers this to musicians, and they absorb it partly by looking at the notation and taking screenshots and all that. But I think they really do make an extraordinary, unbelievable effort to digest this fully in their bodies. And you talked about the opening of Genetic, where they all breathe together, which is, to me, amazing also. I love that. So I guess I'm wondering, what's my question? My question is, to what degree do you think that's really true? And to what degree do you think the musicians then participate in the kind of a more of a visual conception of what they're doing, as opposed to a kind of like this interior sonic melodically oriented basis?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I'm sure, well, no, I can't be sure, but yeah, so the interaction between notation and the inner ear is, you know, profound, and notation shapes what we hear, and what we hear shapes a constant feedback going on. And I think Alit would say that use of notation is changing his music because of that feedback. And so, yeah, there's a visual aspect of using notation, because you see these things, you know, you have an idea, you write it down, you see the way it's organized on the page, and then you, from the visual, you can, you know, work on it, improve it or whatever, or change it. But also, I think that the experience of teaching these pieces to the band makes everybody get that music in their bodies and ears. I mean, you and I, and some of us, those of us who have composed pieces for gamelan, know the transformation that happens between when you come to the rehearsal with the music that you might have written down in your own way, and then you teach it, and then you embody it along with the players, and then, you know, you make changes in it. So I don't know. I mean, I'd love to hear Alit's point of view, but I think some of those things I said are true, that notation is changing his approach to composing and his whole concept of the music, but it's still really closely melded with the oral. What do you think?
Well, I don't know. That's why I asked. Not sure
Yeah,
yet.
that's my, yeah, you know.
Can I, Michael, thank you. Can I chime in here?
Yeah, please. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Ken is returning to what Mas Wayne was saying about the melody. When I think of melody, I was thinking of singing a line, one line.
Yeah.
And now this is so I have a hard time to find the melody of Dewa Alit's piece.
Yeah.
What I'm thinking on this is that seems to me this music has a number of sections, and each section consists of the manipulation of rhythmic and melodic patterns. Do you think that's kind of the description is fit into the music that I hear?
Yeah, I have to say, I think that music is not, we have to kind of let go of the idea that melody is the main thing. I mean, there is melody, because there are notes that come, you know, one after another. Yeah. But it's, I mean, I was just thinking as Wayne was asking his question before about you, because the whole inner melody thing was so important to you in your scholarship at the beginning, you know, I mean, and that was the whole beautiful idea that we all internalized about how gamelan music works, that you hear this line inside, which is not necessarily a line that any particular person is playing, but that nonetheless controls the whole show, you know? That's not happening in Alit's music.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not happening. It's something else now. That's a big break. I see that Chris Hall has a comment.
Chris is next.
Yeah. Where are you, Chris? Can you show up?
Hang on a second here. Hello, how are you doing?
Hey.
I'm trying to remember, I had some thoughts while I believe his name was Alex who was speaking a moment ago. And now I've been distracted by all your other lovely comments here. But anyway, it seemed to me what he was saying was sort of insinuating there's kind of like, you know, the musicians 50 years ago, because they came from a different starting point, may not have been able to pull off the music that these young whippersnappers are doing these days.
Yeah.
And that's something that was interesting. You know, it sort of called to mind some memories I have from, as you know, I recently did my Dharmasiswa last year. And I also saw Alit's group at the IGFM in Munich a couple of years ago when I was playing with Evergreen. The sort of aura that group has is one, just like Putu mentions with the programmatic nature of the title of this piece, it is almost like that group is in search of how to do the kind of witchcraft, black magic. I don't know, like there's this sense I get from having seen them in Munich, knowing what the state of things is with regards to music contemporánea in Bali. I mean, at ISI right now, with all due respect, I will say, I know that a lot of the students of Western music at ISI Denpasar probably don't read Western notation at a level that Alit's group does. I'm beating around the bush. What I'm trying to say is, it seems to me, unlike maybe the musicology based on notated music, the answer in my mind is quite clearly that the group, the particular set of people that Alit surrounds himself with in that group, are the reason that they're able to pull off this music.
Totally.
I would be willing to bet that it's, and again, all due respect to ISI, but it wasn't their preparation from the conservatory that got them to the level they needed to be at, but in fact that Alit is sort of at the helm of a really well-constructed ship with a great crew on it. And I don't know any of those guys personally, but I imagine you do. And I wonder if you have any more to say about this sort of more anthropological idea of ethnomusicology, the people involved and how it is that they help to pull that off.
He's just got a great band. You know, what can I say? He's a dynamic person, and he draws good musicians to him because they want to be challenged. And he is, for the moment, you know, at the center of that. Not only him, there's many other really, really interesting new music hubs around Bali, and they're changing a lot and shifting, and I'm not really up on it. And, you know, we shouldn't really get into the conservatory thing too much because, you know, we all wish them the best. But for the past 20 years or so, you know, the young composers go there and they do their graduation projects, which always involve some kind of composition idea, and they make friendships there. They form a social community. They're busy finishing their requirements for graduation, but then once they graduate, they go back to their villages and they stay together in groups. Well, no, I mean they go back out into the Balinese world and they continue to work together on the things that they really want to do. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know, there's so many different configurations now. There's this whole, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the whole in situ website and project, which is just dozens and dozens of really, really interesting composers doing their best to, you know, make a mark. And there's a real hunger for more interaction and knowledge, and you can't blame people for not wanting to be pigeonholed as Balinese composers doing Balinese music. You know, they want to be part of the bigger community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great.
And why shouldn't they?
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right, Jody is up.
Yeah, that's a great place for the comment that I was going to make. So when Alit was teaching at MIT the year that I was also there, I used to drive him home, and we'd sit in the car and like talk for 2 hours, like, you know, every week. And we had one conversation that I think was particularly significant. He said, because I compose for Balinese instruments and I'm from Bali, everyone thinks that all of my musical ideas come from Balinese gamelan. He said, but that is not true. My ideas come from my accumulated life experience of who I am.
Totally.
And it's like, if someone who doesn't know anything listens to his music, do they think they're hearing Balinese music? I think one of the important elements is the timbre of the instruments. I mean, and we have to like work our way through that to hear structure in the music. I mean, that was the only reason I ever started composing, was that I had done a concert where every piece was different. Javanese piece in Bali and Sunda, and I thought people were going to say, oh, I had no idea gamelan could represent so many different musical ideas. Of course, it was Berkeley. And people came out and said, oh, those gongs are so mellow, man. I just let the sound wash over me. And I was so disappointed because I'd been trying to communicate all different kinds of musical ideas. And I think that's our challenge in listening to Alit's music, is to hear our way, through the timbre of the instruments and whatever we associate with that, in order to encounter his musical ideas.
Yeah.
And I mean, this
not everybody's willing to do that work, but yeah.
Well, I was talking to my composer partner here, and he wanted to know if Alit had a mathematical structure to his tuning system, because I mean, he's very specific about the tuning. And Oscar was telling me he melted down one set of instruments to make new ones, and so you can never play the music that was written for those, which is, that happens. But do you know anything about how he structures the tuning systems for his instruments, how he thinks about them?
Well, actually, I'll just step into, because he's told me a bit about that. He tuned it by ear, mainly just to his taste. And as far as I know, there's no mathematical logic to it. It's just his taste. And for example, the 11-tone tuning system, which Michael was talking about before, each note of the scale has a different ombak frequency to every other, rather than the usual consistent throughout the range, always approximately an 8 beat or 8 beat per second ombak frequency. But each note has its own frequency of ombak, and Alit just says that that was his choice. That was his aesthetic decision. That's how fast he wanted the ombak for that note. But that's all I know. Maybe there's more to it.
Does a single note have an ombak? That's not?
Oh no, I mean with its counterpart.
Within paired tuning. Oh, okay. Yeah. And they're all different?
Every note, it has a different frequency. Yeah.
Every note and its partner, the number of beats is different. So it's not like Samar Pagulingan should be for this number of beats and everyone's different. That's really mind-blowing.
It's pretty wild.
All right, we have a question from Pete.
Hey, Michael, I just had a quick question about, so I think when Salukat went to Munich, was that 2 years ago? They played Memedi, and I think they found out shortly before going that they weren't going to be able to bring the instruments, the Salukat instruments, with them. And Ngejuk Memedi, I believe, was on the program.
Yeah, right.
So in this discussion about tuning, and all of the intricacy, like all those two different scales and all the intricacy involved with the piece, how do you collapse that down into one? How do you take the piece and then kind of it's like, I feel like it's like, so you just got asked, you were going to perform Wagner and they said, no, you have to do it in C major or something. Like you.
Yeah,
like,
right.
Like
I don't know. Wayne.
Right? Do you know how anything about that? How they?
Wayne can tell us.
Because I know that they do it for, they do it for other types of music, right? Traditional music, you can take a Kabir piece and you can bring it to like you can take like Gendarwayang, you can bring it to Kabyar, you can take Kabyar and bring it to Angklung. Like it's
Sure.
a difference of one note, some difference of sound, but this is like a whole nother level. I feel like going from that very idiomatic, tuning to Kabyar and then retaining the, because I heard the recording of it and it's still very compelling to me. Actually, I still hear the same piece there, but it's only
okay. Well, I'd love to hear it.
I have an answer for that. I think that it's a quality of gamelan music, especially because if we take into account every set of instruments having its own tuning, that the sensation of contour of a piece often far outweighs the significance of pitch. I mean, that's how in Java, you can take a piece and play it in 6 different patet, but it's the same piece, not because the tuning's the same, but because the contour is the same and the relationships between the instruments. And I think, because I was in Munich, I think that's how Alit came to terms with not having his instruments, was he couldn't have the tuning, but he could have the contour of all the parts and the interaction of the parts. And then that became a recognizable version of his pieces. Maybe. What do you think?
Yeah, it just struck me as an incredible amount of versatility and flexibility to take a piece that kind of melodically and tonally intricate and bring it to some and have it still work. I just was wondering if any could comment on the process. How
That's for the next lecture.
yeah.
Any more, guys?
Any more questions? Last call for questions. Oh, that's fireworks going off in front of my house.
Well, thanks, everybody. And thank you again, Matt, for being such a great host and organizing all of this.
Absolutely. Thank you, Michael. And I'll look forward, or hopefully everybody's looking forward to our July schedule, which we will be posting probably in a week or so. It should be very exciting. I'm going to put a link to our website, the guest lecture series. That's where you can see all the upcoming lectures, as well as make a donation to the artist to artist preservation series, preservation campaign that we are doing currently. If you are so inclined, that's where you can find all the previous lectures. I will be releasing, I think, 4 lectures tomorrow. I'm a little backed up now, but we're going to be putting them up tomorrow. So thank you, everybody. This was wonderful, and hopefully y'all can come by next time on Wednesday, and we're going to be talking about gamelan from Sunda, from West Java. So that should be very exciting. All right. Thank you very much. Enjoy your evening.
Yeah, thanks everybody for being part of our world. It's great to see you.
Thanks, Michael, for being the brains of this particular one. That was great.
See you guys.